Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome once again to another podcast, Voices for Palestine podcast, that talks to us about the Palestinian resistance or understanding the Palestinian resistance. Voices for Palestine is an organization of like-minded people and Islamic organizations that amplify and give voice to the Palestinian resistance. And today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be discussing Jamuhuri Day, the independence of Kenya, vis-a-vis voices from beneath the rubble. And I'm honored to be with my sister and senior, Sister Fatma Saman. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Barakallahu fiqh. So inshallah ta'ala, to start us off, let us discuss and understand what is Jamuhuri Day for Kenya. What does it mean for Kenya and Kenyans, inshallah ta'ala?
Basically, Jamuhuri Day means we are celebrating the day which Kenya was declared independent after a previous year where we became a self-governing state, then acquired our independence from the British rule. Yeah. That's what is being celebrated, and it's been observed over the years.
Okay, so meaning that Kenya gained independence or celebrates independence on the 12th of December of each year, and we gained independence in 1963. Now, this means that we were not independent before then. What does this mean for Kenya, that we were not independent?
Yes, Kenya was actually an occupied territory. Mm-hmm. The British imperialists invaded Kenya, took over land, mm-hmm. and colonized Kenya. What you would say was that they would acquire the land forcefully from the local indigenous people, and impose forced labor on people whose land they would acquire, and use the same people to till the land. So it was both colonization and slavery at the same time, because the same people whose land was taken away from were forced into working on that land. Mm-hmm. And the British settlers at that time would apportion themselves land and would call it their land, and do plantations and have the indigenous Africans work on that farm. And that's it. So we were basically occupied, colonized. The context is much more bigger. There was this settlers came in, assumed a takeover, and completely disregarded whatever governance systems that existed, how disrespected the community's ownership of land, and took over. So we went through that painful history. And apart from that, they would even impose taxes on the indigenous people. They imposed taxes like what they were calling the hut tax.
For the house?
For any hut that you had, you had to pay a tax to the settler. Then they also imposed poll tax. They imposed, things that actually culminated to the enslavement of the people. And at times they would push them away even from the land into reserves and areas that were uninhabitable. And they ended, like the entire Rift Valley area was demarcated as White Highlands. Even the name changed to the White Highlands. So, and they removed at that time, most of that, the land was occupied by the indigenous Africans. They would either be pushed on the periphery, where the land was inhabitable. Others were carried in lorries and brought back to where it was assumed that they originally came from. in central Kenya. And forcefully, the land was renamed. The British settlers created plantations. They built their own farmhouses on the land. And those who they felt were helpful remained to work in the land. And where even they lived and they had their huts, they were imposed to pay those taxes for their own huts, for their own movement. And it was a very sad history. So that's what had happened to us. And now the journey towards the independence was the most interesting. But again, that's the initial introduction I would like to give, that actually we were an occupied land. We were forcefully, Africans were removed from their land. The land was taken. People were enslaved and treated as if this was their land. And even renaming of the land, like the White Highlands. And that's it. So there was a arbitral law imposed on the people, disregard completely their dignity. Young men would see their fathers being beaten up, forced to work in a farm. So this is what we went through.
Now, it's interesting that when we talk about colonization, that we have a foreign power coming to our land, and in this case, we have Britain coming to Kenya and taking over the land and forcing the natives, the inhabitants of this land, to work in their farms. And I think from what I have also read is that Africans were not allowed also to plant cash crops or something that would benefit them. And it's very interesting. So there are types of colonization that I've just come across, and they say, for example, colonialism is generally classified into one of 5 overlapping types, according to the practices, goals, particular goals and consequences on the subjugated territory and its indigenous peoples. So there are settler colonialism, or there is settler colonialism. There's exploitation colonialism, plantation colonialism, surrogate colonialism, and internal colonialism. Which one was ours from this? Was it a settler colonialism? Was it exploitation? Was it plantation? Which one was it when these people came?
I think for Kenya it was a mix of all. Because first, the indigenous people were removed from their land. Any land that was considered arable, any land that was considered beneficial, they were removed from this land. Any land that had access to water, they were removed from this land, and the land was taken over by the settlers. Then the plantations were introduced, because now the settlers were investing in this land. They came up with the plantation, whether it was a tea plantation, coffee plantation. They came up with the plantations, and they enforced the local communities who were removed from these lands to work as forced labor, to work in the land, and they would pay them a negligible amount of money, and even mistreat them. They were flogged to work in those farms. The women were raped. And it was atrocious. And they would impose taxes still. The indigenous people were working on the farms with very little care or very little concern for their human rights, for their welfare. They were paid meager salaries, wages. They were paid. They were subjected to paying land tax. They were subjected to pay even labor tax. Where they were not able to provide labor, they were forced to pay labor taxes. If they constructed huts to live in, that was a roof over their head and on their own land, they were still taxed to pay. They had to pay taxes. So for Kenya's unique situation is a combination of all that. There was the settler issue, there was the plantations, the enslavement of people within their own land, and mistreatment and torture. Torture was like the order of the day.
What baffles me with respect to colonialism, the settlers, invading Africa, generally and Kenya in particular, is the fact that it's like, yes, it happened 55 or 50 years ago, but it's like it has been removed from our conscience. And yes, we celebrate each year the Independence Day or Jamuhuri Day or Madaraka Day. But how come this has sort of like been forgotten? Is it because there's a deliberate attempt maybe by the settlers or the colonialists that we don't remember that, and therefore we do not think of them as these people who did XYZ to us? What really has happened to us as a nation? Isn't this something that is supposed to be, if I remember correctly, is something that, yes, we studied in history, Scramble for Africa and all that, but it's like today it's no longer being taught with that intensity, or I don't know whether they have watered down the content. I don't know what is happening.
Yeah, it's the colonial mentality, the colonial effect that has been left on us is one. The language we speak today, me and you, is a language we inherited from the colonialists. For me to understand another Kenyan, that's the language we are using. We are not using our indigenous languages. Then the education that we inherited as well was education meant to prepare us to just become a workforce and not to be critical thinkers, to just be able to provide that continuous service. Remember again, when these plantations were established, they were to feed the economy of Britain. And make us dependent on the economy of Britain indirectly. They've created themselves this environment where they're able to get our resources, create something considered within their culture and their context helpful, and sell it back to us. Instead of us using our own raw material, being dependent on our own land and our own lifestyles. So our cultures were ripped off, and we adapted a culture that is conforming to the colonialist, and therefore we became so much dependent on the colonialist. It was taken as a proud thing when a Kenyan went to study in Britain and came back with a degree and was seen as a star. And that's the person that was relied on to develop the country, to change our contexts. So it is, we've become so dependent on the colonialist that we no longer see the brutal history. What we see is the interdependence. Remember also the formation of the Commonwealth countries, where our gold, our diamond, everything went to the British Empire. And the British Empire was built and called the First World, and we are a developing world, and our dependency on the First World. And money is being dished out in terms of loans. We are made to believe, we have this perception that we're much more weaker. We can't survive without the master. So this has not really like 100% left us. So it's the impact of colonialism. We were still dependent. We still use their language. We still communicate to each other in that language. We still even treat each other the way they treated us. If there's a minority community among ourselves, if there's a community that doesn't have representation in parliament, the rights are taken away similarly. Their dignity is compromised similarly. It's like we've been mentored. We've been mentored, and it's part of that mental slavery. It's part of how this affected us, and we pass the same trauma to our children, the same history to our children, and much of that history is untold. It's actually untold. It's only, I think, a lot of it came to limelight during the case, the 2013 case that Kenya took Britain to court, and a few families were compensated. But the interesting thing is the struggle, the torture, the history of so many other Kenyan communities is untold. At least the story of Mau Mau was prominent, and the suffering of Mau Mau was told, and the formation of that resistance. Because Africans, we responded in a certain way to overcome the situation at that time. There were so many resistances. The Bukusu resisted, the Nandis resisted. every other community, but those are the few that I mentioned. The Kisis also resisted. They had a warrior who at that time also was formed a resistance and assisted to, like a pushback, They were able to fight the British rule. But so many other stories are untold. Even Mekatilili's story is told in just there's that mention of Mekatilili and how the Griamas, but at least every Kenyan community had their story.
Yes.
Only that majority of the people at that time did not get to learn how to read and write. And those who actually existed at that time, maybe their oral stories remain untold, and we did not invest in telling our story. And that's why you find a lot of it is just the little history we find in the textbooks. I'd like to give a lot of thanks to people like W.R. Ochieng, who wrote a lot about this. There are some who wrote in comedy or maybe novel-like fictionalized the stories. Meja Mwangi told it in his book, Kakas for Hounds. And you find that this history, we get to outlive it because our focus is just about growth. We're still struggling with the same things. Remember when Kenyatta, who was considered one of the leaders at that time of the resistance, focused on fighting poverty, ignorance, and disease. There was that philosophy. So our philosophy in Kenya was mostly like a survival mode. How are we able to take care of ourselves? How are we able to create? But there is no much into really what went wrong, what didn't work for us, how can we overcome, until what we were calling the second liberation, when we came up with the new constitution. And we had to revisit that. That's at that time, you find at that time Kenya, there was a bit of life in terms of explaining our history. People were a bit conscious of, why did we end up where we are, where we could not even question the fact that we had one ruling party all over the years. There was a very controlled system of governance in Kenya. And we were able now to overcome. And it was considered also a form of not only a liberation, but a revolution, through the law, with coming up with our constitution in 2010, which was promulgated in 2010. So those few years, the history was alive. But somehow, because of our poor politicking, generally we've become a country that's not issue-based. We don't look at the in-depth issues. We're not focused on what philosophy guides us. How do we truly, as Kenyans, come and grow and become better than who we really intend to be? And we keep on blindly celebrating the Independence Day without paying attention to what were the actual contributions. What gaps are untold? Are we able to rewrite those stories? Are we able to understand the dynamics of how we still relate with our master at that time? What is it? What is true independence? How independent are we? Before we even celebrate, how independent are we? Are we truly independent? Are we independent in terms of our economy? How is our borrowing? If you look at our borrowing from the IMF and the World Bank, it's growing over the years. So what does that say about us? Are we truly independent? So these are the questions, critical questions, because we were not trained to think critically. We just take things as they come, listen. That's why in Kenya today you can find someone outrightly just lying to people, and people listen, people don't question. They just listen, clap hands, and go home.
So we celebrate Jamuhuri Day because we became an independent, nation. However, there are aspects that we have more or less forgotten simply because we have become, a reflection of our master. Meaning that, yes, now today I'm wearing a suit and speaking the master's language, and my culture has also changed. Basically, I have now the English culture and everything else. And therefore, I actually identify with the master rather than identifying with maybe my forefathers or the Mau Maus who fought against this colonialism and the settler colonialism that was there then. Now, if we were to look back at the different atrocities, the organs that were employed by the colonial masters or the settler colonialist or the government, then, there were issues to do, for example, with they felt they were superior. Of course, then there was the racism. There is the apartheid, that, this restaurants or this road is only going to be used by the whites. Then, of course, people who resisted, I would imagine that, of course, they would find themselves incarcerated. They would find themselves either beaten. They would even be hanged. They would be killed and all that. Please tell us some of the atrocities that were meted on the Africans who resisted. And of course, you've talked about the land confiscation and being pushed to the reserves, inhabitable areas, and them taking, of course, the best lands in terms of agriculture. Take us through a little bit of, the things that, transpired or we went through as a country. No.
Yes, what happened was that as people were aggrieved because the land was taken, people were forced into even encampment. I think in the 50s, the people were now being forced into camps. But before that, there was also the element where now the indigenous communities started resisting by now refusing to work in those farms. The most famous resistance, which was the Mau Mau resistance, villagers were sworn into secrecy. A good number now had to go into the forest, and the only response they could give, because Britain was such a powerful empire then, was to the guerrilla warfare, where they would come and they would attack the settlers on the road or maybe on the railway. At times, at the government areas. But now, interestingly, the British also recruited home guards. Yes. Home guards who were specifically like the ordinary villagers who are now loyal or considered loyal. And the home guards were the ones who were used now to fight the fighters. Yeah. And the response of the British was very brutal. Yes. They responded with the overwhelming violence. Yes. The stories are told that over 15 battalions of soldiers were brought in from Britain to fight the resistance and to support the home guard in the process. That's actually when the Kenya Kings African Rifles were now expanded and now started playing a bigger role. Sometimes they would even use aeroplanes to conduct surveillance on the people, the fighters on the ground. Yes. And remember, these people didn't have much. They had the machetes. Very few could maybe get access to guns if they raid a few police posts or something. So they didn't have much help. But however, there was the zeal, there was the willpower. So that now villagers don't give enough support to the Mau Mau. They were now, the encampments were introduced, where now people were put in camps. People were put in camps. Movement was restricted. There was imposition of the pass. The Kipande system, where you had to carry a pass, and you could not travel from one area to another without notifying and getting permission and approval from the DC or maybe the chief or something. So it was a very difficult time. However, Kenyans were able to resist. They were still able to resist, and they tried their best even with the little that they have at that time. The response, which was so overwhelmingly violent, is never told. But historically, even at least I can remember when we were reviewing our constitution, we had quite a number of people who could be interviewed and actually tell the Kenyan story and what they actually went through. Africans were not allowed to go to schools if they were not loyal, if they had not taken Christianity as their religion. I remember the only in the 50s there was a church, an African-led church that was introduced. I think it was the African Pentecostal Church that actually came up with schools in the central Kenya. Those schools ended up being closed down. They were the only schools where African children could go. And that time the Kikuyu particularly and the Meru and the Kamba could go and were taught how to read and write. But these schools later on were closed down.
Okay. Yeah.
And they had even a teacher training that was also closed down during now the response of the British. There were young men who had gotten access to Makerere University to go study. Actually, they were pulled out from Makerere and lied to and told that their schools have started in Kenya and they will be brought back. And instead they were brought back and they were locked up in police jails. So so many people were killed. The documented number of the Mau Mau resistance soldiers who were killed was about 11,000. But it is still said that it wasn't a right figure. The figures were much more than that. The rest of Kenya, it remains untold. Leaders like Koitalel Arap Somel's head was chopped off. Taken to Britain. Up to now, it has not been brought back to the country, and yet we are celebrating. It's something very simple like asking for that head. So many Kenyan fighters at that time were taken to Kismayo and condemned to death. The very famous Dedan Kimathi. There are quite a number. I remember the famous story of Mwindi Mbingu, the Kamba, one of the resistance leaders, who was jailed for addressing the colonialists in Kamba language. So the stories are many. From the area NFD where I come from, it's much more painful. It was undocumented. I know so many women were raped. Villages were burnt down. The Giriama community and even the Mijikenda generally went through a lot. Many of them were killed. All these stories remain untold. But in the real sense, the British responded brutally. And killed very many people. And mistreated, tortured so many. And raped so many. And these stories are untold up to today. So this is what Kenyans went through. But at least they were able to continuously build that resistance. A few of the Kenyans who got access to education and now were conscious, they could speak the white man's language and could speak out and say, we are saying no, we want change, we want representation, we cannot be taxed and we are not represented. And slowly by slowly now the momentum started peaking and became successful because also African countries started supporting each other. And the story remains the same. In most of the African countries went through similar. That's why Kenyans independent in particular remained, because also there was that internal divisions where they would enclave certain communities and make them feel like they are superior to the others, particularly in the NFD. They capitalized on that. After torturing people in NFD, after killing them for a very long time, after treating them so badly, I remember livestock, the stories were being told by our grandparents was that livestock was being taken away from them. And they were also encamped in the 50s. The movement was restricted. They were given passes. Those who refused to be recruited into the loyal African soldiers were killed and were mistreated. So at that time, it was much more fierce. In the far-to-reach areas, the fight was much more fierce. And now they started, dividing. Like you see, the indigenous communities that were in the NFD region were Kushites. And were mostly looking, they had their pastoralists. They would move, there was no demarcation of territory between Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya in those areas that were occupied by the nomadic pastoralists. So they started, inciting them against each other. And using actually Kushitic communities, recruiting them into the King's Rifles, recruit them into the police, treat them indifferently. But the beauty is, and the story that's never told, is that these Kushitic communities, particularly the Somalis who were working with the British, ended up supporting the Mau Mau movement. And they were supplying them with goods. they were supplying them with guns. These are the untold stories.
Yes.
And we have gentlemen who really gave a lot of support to the Momo fighters because they could get access to a lot of favors from the white settler because they were using them to make them feel they're more superior, they're not like they're not Africans, and they lied to them.
Yes.
And this was just a way of also delaying the independence.
Yes.
Until there were those who now understood that we are being played against our own and had to sacrifice and had to agree to be part of the same at the coastal area because Muslims were, Islam had spread at that time. There were those Muslim traders who had occupied that area. Mosques were built. Some semblance of good education had begun.
Yes.
And the only way was to, make the coastal people feel like they are different and they shouldn't be part of the rest of Kenya.
Yes.
So that's why actually the Kenyan independence was delayed. But later on, the Kenyans were able to come together as a community, accept to be together. And that's how the Lancaster discussions improved and, later on signed into the independent document. Of course, with all those not taken care of, those mistrusts, those divisions, those assumptions that were created, we still are suffering from that impact even up to today. No one interrogates it.
Yes,
we keep on covering it because it was a taboo to tell those stories. It was a taboo to tell why the NFD wanted to secede because there was continuation of colonization.
Yes.
When the other Kenyans took over and got independent, they started now assuming the Hushites did not deserve independence and started treating them the way the colonizers were treating them, raping their women, taking their livestock, marginalizing them further, assuming that they're not Kenyans. And that pain exists up today, truly speaking. It was not taken care of. Those are the impacts we're suffering. But even as we celebrate our independence, we ought to interrogate these things. We ought to look at them and then also understand that if we are victims of that, we should never allow any other human being anywhere in the world to go through what we went through.
True.
We the sad thing is, as Kenyans, sometimes we even forget that we were the other option. Apart from Palestine, the people who ended up settling in Palestine were actually considered. Kenya was one of the land that was considered to be one of the places that they could be brought to come and stay.
Okay. In terms of decolonization, I have read, for example, Frantz Fanon. He argues that decolonization must involve a violent rupture from colonialism, emphasizing that violence is a necessary means to liberate colonial subjects. He posits that colonialism is inherently violent, and the struggle for independence requires a revolutionary approach that transcends political accommodation. So Fanon's theories suggest that violence is not merely a tool of the colonizer, but also a means for the colonized to reclaim their humanity and agency, ultimately leading to a new human world. The point that I want to, put across here is that yes, there was for example, the Mau Mau movement, and previously colonization was there because of, the economy. That the colonizers came to Africa to look for, frontiers, to look for land, and reap or even rape that land and take whatever produce that they get from these lands, whether it is natural resources, and take them to their mother country. Now, when it became ungovernable in terms of the resistance and very expensive also on them, so it was not economically viable for them to continue, and that is why they basically accepted to leave these countries and give them the independence, so to say. However, these governments like Britain did not necessarily leave these countries on their own. We still have the dependence, as you've said. The other aspect that I would want us to talk to is, because we are celebrating independence, and yet the colonizer, even having been taken to court, denied its own crimes. So there's something that I want to just maybe look at, and that is, there is a documentary that is very important for the viewers, the listeners to actually look at. And the documentary and is actually done by the British Museum. It's called Operation Legacy: How Britain Tried to Erase Its Colonial Crimes. It's about 14 minutes. It talks to us about how Britain, even having been taken to court and did out-of-court settlement, but it still tried to cover up all the crimes that it committed in Kenya, and not necessarily in Kenya, but in Kenya and many other colonies that it had taken. So I wanted our viewers to just look for this Operation Legacy: How Britain Tried to Erase Its Colonial Crimes. The other aspect that is important for us to discuss as we are coming to a close on this issue is that Britain did pay the Mau Maus. They did pay the Mau Mau, and in their I want to just refer to the let me just see.
In 2013.
Yeah, I want to refer to the speech given by Honorable Retired William Hague. He says, however, I would like to make clear now, and for the first time on behalf of Her Majesty's government, that we understand the pain and grievances felt by those who were involved in the events of the emergency in Kenya. The British government recognizes that Kenyans were subject to torture and other forms of ill treatment at the hands of the colonial administration. The British government sincerely regrets that these abuses took place and that they marred Kenya's progress towards independence. Torture and ill treatment are abhorrent violations of human dignity, which we unreservedly condemn. It continues to say the agreement includes payment of a settlement sum in respect of 5,228 claimants, as well as a gross cost sum to the total value of 19.9 million, which basically was paid to the Mau Mau veterans or the victims of the torture, as it says. And there's also a monument that was, the British government actually paid for it, the Mau Mau monument that shows a gentleman, a fighter, a Mau Mau fighter, and a woman handing him a basket of food. And they're not looking at each other, simply signifying that they did not want to know one another, so that if any one of them is caught, they would not be able to say, I saw, this is part of the Mau Mau, or this is part of the people who supply us, with food. Now, this is very important for us to appreciate that the British government, even having tried to cover up, it has also tried, on the other hand, to sort of like mollify and pacify and just tell people, okay, you keep quiet, just take this and forget. Let bygones be bygones, so to say, and let us now look forward. Actually, it actually says that, yes, we have a past, but we also have a future. We have, common interest and all that. Now, this is something that happened to Kenya, and that is why we are celebrating Jamuhuri Day. Today, in our current time, are there countries that are still occupied? And if there are countries that are occupied, is it interesting or disheartening to see that we, people who were colonized, are identifying with the colonizer and not identifying with the colonized? Are there countries like that?
Yeah, there are.
Yes.
There are, and it's interesting how we identify with the colonizer instead of those whose rights have been denied and are going through what we went through many years ago.
Yes.
And I think it just goes back to the same thing, the distorted history,
yes,
the pacification of even our thinking and our minds.
Yes.
That those who colonize us create a relationship between us and them.
Yes.
to make us not only dependent, but to also appreciate and feel like they did something good for us, which is very unfortunate. We stop seeing the damage they did to us and pay attention to the things they did to us. We unapologetically use their language to communicate to each other. We've killed our own indigenous languages. We identify more in terms of those that are oppressing others, assuming that we share, like, for instance, the fallacy is that they are Christian and we are Christian and all that. It's never about that, because in countries that are still going through that oppression, like Palestine, have Christians. And they don't identify with those Christians there. Why would they identify with Christians all over the place? So it's a kind of a mentality and a perception that has been created to make us ridicule a community. Use the colonial language among ourselves, even to ridicule others. When we feel our identity or our relationship with the master is compromised, we tend to jump in before the master. So we're still that what we call the house slave. We're the
house
same,
nigger.
The house nigger. It's the house nigger mentality that we still have. We cry more than bereaved. We are the ones pointing out why people should just accept to be oppressed. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. So it's and that is why I think in Kenya, as educators, we fought for critical thinking as a major component of learning, because majority of Kenyans were taught just to take in anything that they've been told and never to question and never to rationalize. And that's why you find, people could be told anything and they just take in. They don't question. They don't read deeply. We've been hyped to just think relates education and job and employment, not education for growth, education for change, education for questioning ourselves, for improving self-improvement. We don't think of that. Our thinking is just we get ilm, we get knowledge for purposes of getting ourselves jobs. So we never take anything seriously.
Unfortunately.
And this is the sad thing about our country, and the lack of research, lack of understanding. Before you take even a faith, it's good to understand. The beauty about Islam is always we're told read. Read the Quran, understand, learn the language of the Quran, understand what God is telling you independently. You don't need an intercessor, you don't need a translator, you don't need to go through anybody else. Independently understand and build your relationship, an independent relationship with God. So it's encouraged, and that's why you find in the early the history of civilization. In the early days, societies and communities that had a proper schooling system, a proper education system, are the communities and the societies that grew and became much more progressive, much more, they came up with good thinkers, philosophers, people who are positive and productive in life. So I think we need to revisit this history. Where did the rain beat us? And understand why is it that we have a tendency of supporting oppressors than supporting and helping others liberate. Because when we found our own liberation, doesn't mean someone else elsewhere who is being enslaved and is being treated badly doesn't have a right to get what we fought for. We should be able to support because we were supported. Other African countries stepped in. Somalia was one of the biggest supporter to Kenya to gain its independence. Tanzania, the same thing. And we did the same for South Africa. That is why you find, because of the painful history South Africa went through, South Africa was one of the countries that has truly stood by Palestine and understand those dynamics. Ireland, the same thing. Countries that were mistreated, the Spanish,
they knew
with the oppressed. But when it comes to us Africans, we are so much, we are not accepting that there's new colonialism.
We have been made to feel inferior.
We have been made to feel inferior. We are still connected to the master. We are still responding to the master. They call the shots for us. They tell us how to think, where to go, who to support, who not to support. And we still abide blindly. It is the long history of, our minds being enslaved. And it's high time we free ourselves by research, by reading history, by understanding dynamics, by questioning things that we have been told over the years.
Okay. It is said Palestine, let me see. Palestine was formed or rather Palestine as an occupied territory. Sorry, let me just... The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, delivered a significant advisory opinion in July 2024, affirming Israel's occupation of Palestine or Palestinian territories is unlawful and demanding its immediate end, calling on all states to cease aiding the occupation and cooperate to terminate it, while also stressing Israel's obligation as an occupying power, particularly regarding the humanitarian aid and the protection of civilians and the UN personnel, including UNRWA in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. So this is what the ICJ said last year. But if you were to look back and see how Israel was formed, basically we would say that Israel was formed in 1948 through the brutal displacement of nearly 800,000 Palestinians and the destruction of more than 530 towns and villages. This premeditated ethnic cleansing is known as a Nakba, the catastrophe. Since then, Israel has implemented a regime of settler colonialism, apartheid, and violent occupation over the Palestinian people. Now, if this is what we know, or what we should know, I would say that what we should know about Palestine, maybe just shed some light on the fact that this is how Israel, was formed, through the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, 800,000 displaced, and others, of course, were killed, and then 530 villages were destroyed. What should we know about Palestine, and how come? It's something that, inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to refer to in terms of one of the historians has written about Palestine, telling us how something like this happened at a time when the world was basically, a small village. People would tend to know about things that were happening then, but they didn't know, or it has been removed from our conscience. Just tell us a little bit about Palestine, and then we look at, what happened in Palestine, and it's an occupation. As we said, the ICJ has ruled that it is occupied. In fact, what we refer to as Palestine, or the West Bank, Gaza, and parts of Jerusalem are occupied Palestinian territories. So there is an occupation going on, just like we were occupied in Kenya. So we want to, as we are celebrating Jamuhuri Day, we need to realize that we cannot truly be free unless the whole world is free.
Sure.
How come are we not talking about, the Palestinians, being occupied, and the atrocities, just like we faced atrocities in Kenya, they are facing them live-streamed genocide, as we have seen.
Yes. I think the saddest thing that every human being has to live with is that, there's no worse lie than a lie that you tell yourself and live it.
Yes.
And I think it is unfair. It is unfair for us to assume that everything told to us, but by people who we outrightly see are not only oppressors, are not only, unjust, are people who have made it deliberate, have made deliberate attempts to misinform the entire world and to lie about a community. Look at it this way. Someone takes your land, expects you not to resist, forces you to work for them, kills you, and destroys your property, and expects you not to raise a finger and not to say anything. If you raise, you're a terrorist.
Yes.
Isn't this the same reference that was given to the Mau Mau? The Mau Mau were called terrorists.
Exactly.
They were called savages. Africans were called savages.
Yes.
The dehumanization of communities was actually in preparation to their execution.
Yes.
I usually say sometimes people are made to look so horrible, so bad, so that it becomes easy for the occupier and the oppressor to abuse their rights, and the rest would be comfortable to keep quiet and say, after all, they are savages.
Yes, exactly.
And that's it. If you go back to the history books, we were not even called by our skin, like the blacks.
Yes.
We were called savages.
Yes.
That is the reference. That and you hear Israel calling Palestinians human animals, you know, and belittling them, making them alienated from the rest of the world. And we have continually ingested that in our thoughts and accepted it. It's an insult to our conscience. It is an insult to our intellect. And it is sad that we take that. We take that, and our response is quiet, and that we are okay as long as this suffering is not about me. But we are connected. These are human beings like us. We are not free until everyone else is free. We are not liberated until everyone else is liberated. That is why you find people who have a conscience, people who have a moral conscience, are able to stand up, including even people who are Israel born, are standing up and speaking out and saying that this is wrong. This is wrong. What we are doing to the Palestinians is wrong. This is their land. We've occupied their land. We are oppressing them. We are mistreating them. Yet we expect them not to even respond. It beats the logic. So for me, I would go like, sometimes we decide to be blind. Which is unfortunate. But the more we blind ourselves, the more we move into a dungeon as a people. The more we live lives that have no dignity. Because as long as you are able to take it and accept that it is okay for another human being to suffer, then what quality of a life are you living yourself? What happens to your conscience daily? How do you go to bed and sleep thinking it is okay for children to be buried under the rubbles, for homes to be destroyed, for people to be arbitrarily called whatever people feel like they should call them, and kill them? I mean, what stops that circumstance to come to your door tomorrow? Because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Now, the core of the so-called Palestine-Israel conflict is as simple as a settler colonialists, coming to a land and invading it. It's not about Arabs and Jews. It is not about Muslims and Jews. It is as simple as that you have a colonizer and the owner of a country, the inhabitant of this country, or the native of this country. And in this case, we have the Palestinians, who are the natives of Palestine, and then you have these colonizers who came from Europe. It's as simple as that. When you hear stories, people saying or claiming, it's complicated. There is nothing complicated. There is no complication here.
Exactly.
There is no complication. It's as simple as that. Now, in 1948, 1947, 1946, we had the Nakba, as I've just referred to. And I would like to read one of the books written by Professor Ilan Pape, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And it's a very interesting read because it captures the Nakba itself, the systematic annihilation and destruction of Palestine, and the Hebraization, basically killing people, removing people from their towns and villages, and then naming them with Hebrew names to make them sound, Hebrew or Jewish or something like that. So he says, but beyond the numbers, after telling us about the 800 people, the 530 villages and all that, he says, beyond numbers, it is the deep chasm between reality and the representation that it is most bewildering in the case of Palestine. And here is where I want us to just pay attention to these words. He says, it is indeed hard to understand, and for that matter to explain, why a crime that was perpetrated in modern times and at a juncture in history that called for foreign reporters and the UN observers to be present should have been so totally ignored. And yet, there is no denying that the ethnic cleansing of 1948 has been eradicated almost totally from the collective global memory, and erased from the world's conscience. Now, this is something that happened in 1948,
Yes.
and he talks about it in this manner. It is strange that he talks to it, to the genocide or to the ethnic cleansing in this manner, and wondering that how has it remained hidden and forgotten? And yet today we are seeing a live-streamed genocide, and people are refusing to talk about it. They're even denying that it's actually happening. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
You know what's interesting is about how narratives are created.
No.
And this is why when we continuously ignore history,
Yes.
it has a way of destroying us in future. Because as history teachers, we always used to tell our students,
Yes.
the reason why we must study history is because it helps you know where you came from and how to take care of your current circumstances and plan for your future.
Yes.
You know, erasing history comes from also distorted history. Sometimes deliberately, what we've seen common in the Palestinian paradox is actually outright lies being told.
Yes.
Using those lies in the mainstream media repeatedly over the years,
Yes.
to the extent that those who are ingesting the information from the mainstream media are indoctrinated
Yes.
to think in a certain way. So the moment you are taught to accept a lie, and this lie is told repeatedly to you, it becomes now your truth.
Yes.
And this truth is meant to actually distort the actual truth. And therefore it becomes easy for people to get away with everything else that they tell you.
Yeah.
Imagine someone who's not only an idolate, someone who totally is an atheist, using the Bible
Yeah.
and coming outrightly to say that these people were mentioned in the Bible and this needs to, it beats common sense.
Yes.
But in the real sense, this is a lie, this is a narrative that has been crafted deliberately over the years. While we were running around our lives, this was a deliberate story being told so that settlers in Palestine can survive, so that they can thrive, so that it can grow into a community, so that it can create the confusion that the world keeps on referring to, that the question of Palestine is a confusion. The question of Palestine is a complex. What made it complex? It's very simple. People came to someone's land, occupied it, forcefully took it, pushing them to the periphery, renamed their land, build and construct outrightly while the world is watching.
Yes.
Modern construction on people's farms, uprooting olive trees deliberately, trying to erase an entire history of our people, trying to ethnic cleanse people, and everyone else is taking it in. Because you've been told to think negatively about people, you've been lied to over the years, you've been told things that are deliberately meant to orchestrate, negative attitude towards those that are occupied, towards those that are oppressed, so that you find it is okay to continuously oppress them. This happens. This happens because these are people who are treacherous in nature, and because they want this agenda to move, they've prepared it. They've prepared it over the years. It is not overnight. So for us to liberate ourselves, even in terms of thinking, it takes time. It genuinely takes time to liberate how we think. We go back to true history, asking questions. Why is this being said repeatedly? Why should we just take the face value of everything? Why can't we question? Why is it difficult to talk about Palestine? Why is it a complex issue? Who made it complex anyway? I mean, when people are crying and telling you my land has been taken, my children are being killed, our homes are being destroyed. I mean, who would just come and say that out of the blue? No one. But that not even taking time to have it discussed as a discourse in our universities is surprising. It should be something we discuss comfortably in the classrooms. It should be something we ask ourselves continuously. We can speak it in the mainstream media. We don't need anybody's permission to think.
We are not allowed to speak about this, unfortunately. Education and institutions of higher learning prided themselves that anything can be discussed, we can debate. But there are issues that we are not even allowed to discuss.
Yes.
We are not even allowed to debate. We are not allowed to question. And this begs the question, is there something that we are trying to hide? Now, a second quotation from the same book by Professor Ilan Pape also would shed some light on the propaganda machine of Israel, or what they call the Hasbara. So he says that after they had killed one of the UN's representative who had come to try and mediate, after the news now started getting out, and Israel would have been seen in bad light. This is what happened then, and we're talking about 1948. We're not talking about October 2023. He says, however, when the results gradually became visible, the government needed a public relations campaign to stymie adverse international responses, and began to involve and inform those officials responsible for producing the right image abroad, that a liberal democracy is in the making. Officials in the foreign ministry worked closely with the country's intelligence officers, who would warn them in advance of the next stages in the cleansing operation, so as to ensure they would be kept hidden from the public eye. So we can clearly see that the IOF, the Israel occupying forces, from that day they realized that giving the right image, an image of democracy, an image of a good people, was very important. So they started this in 1948. The Hasbara, the social media wars. When you talk about Palestine, you are censored, your social media pages are taken down, they are closed, and all that. This is not something that started yesterday. Unfortunately, because we do not read, we are unable to fathom or appreciate and understand what has been transpiring. So, for example, another book that is also important with respect to what you are saying, that this is a discourse that needs to be discussed out in the open, in our universities, in the mainstream media. But as you can clearly see from this title, except for Palestine, we can talk about everything else except for Palestine. When it comes to Palestine, no, I am not. It's not my area of expertise. It is complicated. We come with all manner of excuses not to talk about this. However, if you look at what has actually been written, over the years, and these are very, few books around, what has been transpiring in Palestine. We have said the occupied Palestinian territories, Gaza is an open cage. Gaza is actually an open cage, or the iron cage, as is written here in this book. Then we also have the biggest prison on earth. This is Gaza again. And when you talk about the Western Bank or the West Bank, you would be talking about a place or a town that is occupied by Palestine. Then you have the 100 Years War on Palestine that captures for you, the ongoing occupation of Palestine. So when we think that this is an Israel-Arab conflict, it is not even a conflict. It is not even a war. It is a genocide. And what Professor Ilan Pape and Noam Chomsky, in this book, they have a very good, quote that I love from, after reading this book. He says, Israel has been engaging in incremental genocide. Incremental genocide. So it is not a genocide that started in 2023. In fact, I have done a study, and I've seen there are probably about 15 or more massacres that we have actually seen from around 1967. And before 1967, when you look at 1948 itself, here, you'd find that there are documentaries about places like Tantura, There's a massacre that happened in Tantura, and many, many other massacres that we have. And therefore, when we talk about Palestine being occupied and Kenya celebrating Jamuhuri Day, we need to draw parallels and appreciate that this is actually something that happened to us, and it is happening to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. And the things that we have seen from October 7th, 2023, things that we would not even imagine seeing or hearing of. We have seen, maimed bodies. We have seen charred bodies. We have seen malnourished bodies. We have seen in all manner of different types of deaths, different shades of death, if you like. Wal-'iyadhu billah. And despite all this, there are people who still claim that there is no genocide, and hush, you don't even want to talk about this. So it is important for us as Kenyans, when we celebrate Jamuhuri Day, let us remember, yes, we are celebrating that we've become an independent nation. There are people who are still suffering the same way our forefathers suffered. Now, coming towards the end of this program, what is our role with respect to our brothers and sisters who are still suffering under colonialism, under the settler colonization? What is our role?
Speaking out,
yes,
telling the truth about it, providing them the support and the platform that they don't have.
Yes.
You see, when people are oppressed, they don't have space to speak.
Yes.
They don't have a platform to actually tell their story. We tell their story on their behalf.
Yes.
We create awareness further.
Yes.
And we speak out. And as a country, we choose not to support oppressive regimes.
Yes.
Because again, it doesn't help. Yes. Because anybody who has a tendency of oppressing others will, if find opportunity, will oppress you at the same time.
True.
Nothing stops them.
Yes.
Those atrocities that are being committed against Palestinians are atrocities that can as well be committed against us.
Yes.
If any of their interests shows up, yes, among ourselves.
Yes.
So we really need to speak out. We need to support the Palestinians, provide all the help and we can, and stand with them, yes, and push and petition the government to be able to completely disassociate with Israel.
The divestment.
Yeah. And boycott products that have been used to carry these narratives, have been used to sustain the torture and the suffering of the people in Palestine. We boycott those products.
You talked about boycott. I think one of the things that jumps to my mind right now is Coca-Cola as a company is actually, it operates a plant in occupied, I think, West Bank, if I'm not mistaken. So a parcel of land that has been taken away from the Palestinians, that is where they went and constructed their own plant. So this is not just a company or a product that is there doing its business, but rather it is actually entrenching the occupation of Palestine. And this is one of the products that we really need to boycott. And when we are boycotting Coca-Cola, it is not just Coca-Cola, it is Coca-Cola and all its produce. So whether it is Coca-Cola, Fanta, Sprite and all that, and the Dasani, it is important for us to appreciate that. You've also highlighted the fact that we also need to give voice to the Palestinian cause. And it is interesting right now, it is said when war breaks out, the first casualty is the truth.
Yes.
The first casualty is the truth. And this, of course, is the narrative that we have. So you have the narrative from IOF, the Israel occupying force, and then you have the narrative of the Palestinians who are saying we are being killed, and we are. And in fact, if anything, today Israel has killed more than 270 journalists, because its enemy is not Hamas, its enemy is not the Palestinians, its enemy is the truth. And that's why they are out there to kill the journalist. But the point that I actually want to come out very clearly is that the Palestinians are the ones filming the genocide itself, they are filming their own death. They are filming all the atrocities that are meted on them, because the IOF is not allowing independent journalists. It is not allowing foreign journalists into Palestine, or whether it is Gaza or the West Bank. The other interesting bit, inshallah ta'ala, as we also come to a close, is the fact that we have mentioned this is an occupier and the native people of Palestine. It is always believed, or rather it is believed by many, this is an Arab-Israeli conflict. I would not have done service to this episode if I do not mention two books by Reverend Mundhir Ishaq. Reverend Mundhir Ishaq is a reverend at the Bethlehem Bible College in the West Bank, in Bethlehem. And he has written two books. One he wrote several years back, known as The Other Side of the Wall, which depicts the apartheid regime of, what is West Bank and Gaza, showing that there is racism, there is apartheid. They are not allowed, just like you've talked about the Kipande system in Kenya that we went through. You've talked about people being pushed to reserves. The Palestinians are pushed, to ghettos. In this book, even in 1948, Professor Ilan Pape says that Palestinians were pushed to ghettos. They were pushed to slums. And now, in the other side of the wall, so Father Mundhir Ishaq talks about that, and he talks about the difficult life, the misery that they are living as Palestinians. It is important to also appreciate that this is a Christian Palestinian, and he's talking about the brutal regime or occupation of Palestine. The second book, which is also very interesting, is called Christ Under the Rubble. Christ Under the Rubble. And he says in this book that if Jesus was born today, he would be born under the rubble. And our podcast today was talking about Jamuhuri Day, Voices from Beneath the Rubble. We have seen children, killed. Over 77,000 people have been killed. Official records say that. But unofficial records put the estimate to about 370,000 people have been killed. And this, of course, does not mean that they are not more than that. There are people who have died not of gunshot wounds, not of bombs, not of fires, but just natural illnesses that could have been prevented. Maybe if they had gone to hospitals, the hospitals have been bombed. So as we celebrate Jamuhuri Day, it is important for us to remember that we have faced what our Palestinian brothers and sisters are facing, and therefore we need to empathize with them. We need to identify with their pain, and we need to amplify their voice against the persecution that they are going through. And lastly, inshallah ta'ala, there is a campaign being run by Voices for Palestine, that is Tree for Gaza. And inshallah ta'ala, the money that is raised from this campaign is going to be channeled to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, specifically for medical cases. So inshallah ta'ala, if this episode has been enlightening for you, kindly share, kindly support our cause to amplify the voices of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Barakallahu feekum. Inshallah ta'ala, if you have a parting shot, inshallah ta'ala, we can end with that. Barakallahu feek.
Thank you very much. Mine is to just say the same, that we need this out there. We need to further create consciousness among our Kenyans, and it is important as a people who have gone through colonization to actually empathize and stand by the Palestinian cause and support it till they find their independence.
Barakallahu feekum. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.